Thank you, Jackie. Thank everyone for coming and for MRC for hosting this event. Really appreciate the opportunity to read my work. I'll be reading to you tonight from a novel, a fiction novel called The Domino Effect. It's a coming-of-age story, and what I consider the traditional coming-of-age story, meaning there's no werewolves or wizards or vampires who just happen to be teenagers struggling through life. This is actually just about teenagers sort of struggling with that process of growing up. The story is set at a boarding school in New Jersey in the 1990s, and the narrator informs the reader of his backstory in a prologue, which precedes the first chapter. And I'm going to read to you part of that prologue tonight. And I must admit, one thing that strikes me as a little bit odd is that the narrator of the story happens to be a 17-year-old kid from Queens, and I am not and not. So work with me as I try and channel this character the best I can, okay? Prologue. A famous writer once said that anybody who survives childhood has enough stories to tell for the rest of their lives. I survived, barely, and high school was the hardest part, especially the last year. And to tell the story of my last year of high school, I have to start with the first year, then the second, and the third. These first three parts will be quick and painful, I promise. First year. I had a lot of things going for me before high school started. It had been some summer, lots of sun and all that, but it was more than all that. I had friends, kids I'd grown up with, kids that met every morning on the sidewalk in front of my place. And every day I'd take the lead by doing something nuts, like grabbing a watermelon from the fruit stand so the owner would chase me down the block, or I'd have a seat at the sidewalk cafe and make like the big guys drinking little cups of coffee with their pinkies in the air. Once in a while, out of nowhere, I'd drop a pack of firecrackers in the gutter and let the morning explode for a minute. Stuff like that. Harmless stuff, but good stuff anyway. And the guys always laughed and followed me to the schoolyard, where they didn't mind when I picked the worst guy first. We'd play all morning with just a stick and a ball and a strike zone spray painted against the wall. The same wall that held our names. Up top, higher than the rest, was my name, Domino. Everybody called me that, even though my real name was Danny Roro. I'd lived in that Queens neighborhood my whole life. My mother grew up there too. She'd come from Sicily with her parents when she was 8 years old. Same house that we lived in. My father was from an Italian background too, but from all over New York. His mother died when he was a kid, from tuberculosis or something, and he spent his childhood being shipped off to different relatives and foster homes. He was into music, drums mostly, and at 18, he joined the service and spent the next 4 years touring the world with the Air Force Band. After he got out, he met my mother at the Roseland Ballroom in Manhattan, and she brought him home to Queens. Everybody liked my father. He was funny and smart and what people around called a stand-up guy. He always talked to me about doing the right thing, about looking out for other people and helping them whenever I could. He talked a lot about his heroes, like Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. I listened. I always listened because Pop was my hero, and I wanted to be like him, talk like him, act like him, and everything. So that's why they called me Domino, because my father's name was Dominic, and in Italian, Eno kind of means little. So little Dom translated into Domino, excuse me. Everybody called me Domino, except my mother called me Daniel, and my father called me Pal. And by the time Pop called me home for dinner, the summer before high school started, I'd been out on my own for most of the day with my friends. After playing ball all morning, we'd go to the pizza parlor and get slices with the money in our pockets. And afterwards, we'd go back to the schoolyard, or maybe, if it was real hot, we'd go down to Spaghetti Park and watch the old-timers play bocce. Or maybe we'd kick around the Italian ice stand, under the awning, licking ices and talking a million ways around what was going on with our bodies. Our muscles growing and our veins pumping with this crazy energy that led to the kind of things we knew next to nothing about, but wanted more than anything in the whole world. And even after my father called me home and I had dinner with my parents, I kept thinking about those things me and my friends talked about under the awning of the Italian ice stand. And that taste of watermelon stayed with me through dinner. And the best part of the whole summer was that after dinner, I got to walk down to Jeannie Martini's house. Jeannie Martini was the cutest girl in my class. She was short and brown-eyed and had what people around called a great set of lungs. Her father was a plumber and into the races, so he'd be out most nights at the track. Her mother wasn't around at all, so Jeannie's grandmother came downstairs most nights, and Jeannie and I would share a love seat in the front parlor while Nona watched her programs in the next room. Under the blare of the television and the switching of the scenes, Jeannie and I would whisper in the fake light and touch each other best we could until her father came whistling up the stairs. I felt invincible back then, kind of like the superheroes in the comic books I collected. But all summer long, there had been signs that something was coming. Darker kids with darker hair started to appear on their bikes, riding through the neighborhood in the middle of the day. And this was the problem, because this was our neighborhood, and our neighborhood was supposed to be all Italian, so strangers weren't welcome. When someone yelled, "Spick!" we dropped whatever we were doing and chased that dark stranger back under the bridge. The elevated trains ran through our part of Queens, and our neighborhood was separated from the next neighborhood by an overpass that every couple of minutes rattled over our heads. This was the border, and I, in all my life, had never set foot on the other side of that bridge. Stupid stuff. I even knew then, but the bridge was kind of sacred too. So much so that all my guys supported this great idea I had to spray paint an Italian flag on the other face of the bridge, just so those from that side would know not to pass over into our side. With a spray can in each back pocket and one in my hand, I skipped Jeannie Martini's house one night, and before it got too dark, I climbed the stairs to the train station, slipped under the turnstile, and sized up the nearly empty platform. Down at the far end, with no trains in sight and no one looking, I jumped down to the track, high-stepped over the electric rail, and crossed to the other side. I ran down to the bridge, listening and looking for an oncoming train. I could see all the rooftops, and the clothes hung between the buildings, and the skyline of Manhattan in the distance. My heart pounded, and the sooty air swarmed me as I leaned over the railing and quickly as I could, sprayed, wide as I could, a red rectangle, a white rectangle, and a green one too. I was so panicked and distracted and desperate to finish that I wasn't even sure if I got the order of the colors correct. I dropped the cans and ran fast as I could, down and across the tracks. It was hard to breathe after getting up onto the platform, but I kept running all the way home. Pop was waiting for me on the stoop. "Jeannie called, pal," he said. "Wonder where you been." He looked at my hands and forearms, dusted with fresh paint, and my sweat-soaked shirt lined with filth from the platform and the bridge. So now he was wondering where I'd been too. I told Pop everything back then. So I told him about the flag and the bridge and the kids we called Spicks. And he kept me in the house for the rest of the summer.